Hello everyone, and welcome to the Future of Dogs podcast, a place for the whole dog world to come together and ask the big why and what if questions that will shape the dogs of the future. Join me, Hannah Malloy, as we chat to some of the world's most groundbreaking professionals intent on enriching and evolving the future of dogs. This podcast is in association with Amplified Behaviour, my online video learning library for dog owners and dog geeks. Big thanks to my dog's favourite food and our Season 1 sponsor, Nature's Menu. With over 40 years in the pet food business, Nature's Menu is Europe's leading expert in raw and natural pet food. So let's jump into the conversation. Welcome to another wonderful episode of the Future of Dogs podcast. And this week's episode is titled The Future of Dog Food. Ooh. And for this amazing subject, which I'm sure you're all on the edge of your seat for, we have an absolute industry expert. She is a registered veterinary nurse. She's a puppy school trainer, and she's also the vet education manager at Nature's Menu. Melanie Sainsbury, welcome to the show.
Hello, thank you very much for having me.
It's our pleasure. So, Melanie, tell us a little bit about how did you get into pet nutrition? Like, give us a bit of your backstory. Where have you come from?
Oh, well, I suppose I've got my first dog to thank for that, really. So I've ever since I can remember, I wanted to be a veterinary nurse. Since I was a teeny tot, I wanted to be a veterinary nurse, not a vet. I wanted to do the looking after and the feeding. That was my most important thing. I've always been a bit of a feeder. And so I became a veterinary nurse, and I sort of worked my way up through the ranks, became senior nurse, head nurse, and had been in practice for about 15 years. And eventually was able to get my own dog. I waited about 10 years before I got my own dog. I'd always grown up with them, but it was never the right time for me and my husband to get our own one. And then finally the time came. And I got this little squidgy puppy from through work. Obviously, being a veterinary nurse, he's not quite the full ticket, but that's a complete different story. But obviously I had this teeny tiny puppy, and I just wanted to make sure I gave him the best of everything.
Yes.
And so I started to look into food, and he did come home on a food that was a little bit rubbish, which was okay for the time being. And then I looked at more natural kibbles, and I'd already sort of clicked that the stuff we were selling in surgery probably wasn't the greatest. There was a lot of corn, there was a lot of maize, and something to me just flagged, that's not what I want to be feeding my dog. So I went into more natural kibbles to start with, and then obviously it sort of tumbleweed, and I looked online and I started to stumble across YouTube videos of people raw feeding. And obviously being a vet nurse at the time, it was a bit, what are these people doing? They're all crazy.
Yeah.
But then the more I looked into it and the more I read about it, and I was emailing frantically all these different raw food companies, like, what can I do? I'm a veterinary nurse and people frown upon this. And I got so much advice and so much support. I thought, let's give this a go. I'm going to do it. So about 4 months old, I got my first lot of raw food, and I fed it to my dog. And he loved it, absolutely loved it. And I got real joy out of feeding it to him as well. It was just so pleasurable for me.
And what kind of food was that? How did you go about that the first time round, Melanie? Was the companies already around? Were you doing it DIY? Like, how did you do that?
Yeah, it was some and some, really, because I was a bit iffy on how to fully transition him over, and nobody really had any sort of advice. It was just switch him straight over. But my veterinary head was going, that's not right. We need to do this slowly. So I dabbled in it a little bit. So it was a little bit of 100% chicken. I then also got a big bag of chicken wings, and everyone in practice was like, what are you doing, you crazy woman?
No.
If you have an out of hours call, I'm not coming in to see you.
Yeah. Wow.
So yeah, it was all a bit dabbling. And then I just enjoyed it so much. I thought, I'm going to go whole hog on this. And at about 6 months old, I put him on it full time, both meals, or 3 meals a day at that time, and never looked back. Just never looked back. And he's now 11. He's going to be 12 in a few months, and he's just done so fantastically well on it. He looks great. His teeth are great. His coat's wonderful. He's slim. He's fit. He's healthy. He does 2-3 mile walks every day. And this weather, when it's the summer, we're down on the beach, he swims, and he's just so healthy. And
what flavour is he, Melanie? What flavour?
He is a chocolate Labrador cross Springer.
Delicious flavour.
So he's full of bounce, still full of bounce.
Full of, and really active as well.
Yes, very much so. Yeah, loves the water. And now he's got a little brother who's a purebred Springer Spaniel to join the clan. Who's actually just coming in to see me now because he knows I'm talking about him.
Full of bounce, full of beans.
Yeah.
That is so you really pioneered it, to be honest with you, Melanie. You weren't you were stepping out in quite a scary environment with actually there's a lot of hostility, isn't there, in this sort of kibble versus raw food / fresh food world. It's a very contentious area. And what did you see? What made you stick with it? What was the difference in your dogs before they were on that kind of food and then afterwards?
It sounds a bit stereotypical because I think most people say this when they switch over, but the poos, the poos are just joy, an absolute joy. And myself and my husband laugh about it now because we've become real dog poo connoisseurs, as we say.
Come on.
So we walk, wherever we walk past maybe a dog poo that somebody hasn't picked up and you go, oh, you can see they don't raw feed. As you walk past and you stick your nose in the air as you walk past, you think, oh dear, what is that dog being fed? But the poos are just wonderful. I mean, they're just so easy to pick up. They're small, they're firm. You don't have to be embarrassed and start scraping it up with two bags on your hands. It's and just the health aspect, the muscular aspect. I can see the muscles in my dog. Even though he's now 11, I can still see he's got excellent muscle definition. He's got a waist that nips in. Sometimes he does go a little bit overweight if he's maybe not exercising as much, or I've overfed him, or he goes and stays with my mum and dad for a few days.
Pizza crust.
So sometimes he does get a little bit wide, but with raw feeding, it's so easy to work that off again. High protein, low carbohydrate. That's what we all dream of. I wish I could follow it myself.
I know, right?
And
it's true.
Yeah, it's just wonderful.
So many of my friends who are really big into raw feeding just have these incredible Instagram accounts with some of the most delicious looking plates of food with balanced, and everybody's comments are that dog eats better than I do. And the thing is, why not? They actually don't get the choice, do they? We live with them. We've brought them into our homes. We have controlled so much of their life. And so many, dogs are very foodie. They hung out with us on a basic level a long time ago as scavengers to survive. And they were like, oh, your bins smell delicious. So if we've stopped them from getting out of the house and they have to stay with us every day, I think there's nothing wrong with saying, make sure that food is tasty. It's full of all the things that they need. Because why not? They deserve it as far as I'm concerned.
And I have dogs to spoil them. So that's my purpose in life, is to spoil my dogs rotten. So, and I think raw feeding is a great way of doing it because you're not doing any harm.
That's it. Now that I can hear them already, we've moved off poo quickly, but I do just love that idea, just for a second, Melanie, of you doing a sort of Jurassic Park exploration of poo. But we do this, don't we? We have to. As behaviourists and trainers, we're like, that is really interesting change. And I just before we move off this subject of behaviour change and transition to something else, I have to say, so many of my clients have their behaviour changed by eating raw and fresh food. It's not a hard sell for me. I love that Nature's Menu are on board with this podcast because my dog already eats their food. All of my clients use Nature's Menu's treats. They just do, because they've got the highest protein content. And dogs are really good at checking the difference. Back in the day when I used to use cheese, you'd get mild cheese, medium cheese, and high cheddar. And they'd be like, obviously, the mature cheddar is the best because I have a massive analyzer on the end of my schnoz and it's really good at telling the difference between tasty. So I absolutely highly recommend eating and working with these kinds of treats and cheese. But in terms of your background and getting into pet food, what was that like? What was it like stepping from veterinary nursing into veterinary education for a pet food company? And what kinds of stuff do you do?
Yeah, so initially I was employed. So I wanted to, it was time for me to get out of practice. I'd sort of gone as far as I wanted to, and I just wanted to do something different. But I wanted to carry on working in an industry that I was passionate about. So obviously I'd looked at repping. That's normally a normal stepping stone for vets, vet nurses, etc., to come out of practice and go into repping. But I didn't want to be going around selling wormers or vaccinations, because you just think, oh, how many times can I talk about that on a daily basis? So I just sent my CV out absolutely everywhere I could to all these raw food companies, and Nature's Menu picked up on it, and they initially employed me to go and educate veterinary practices. So I was just driving all over the country, here, there, and everywhere, buying lots of sandwiches, lots of donuts, taking them into practice, doing a little presentation for sort of 45 minutes to an hour about raw food, and just sort of settling down the veterinary staff and saying, look, it's not all terrifying. Please don't put all raw food under one umbrella.
Sure.
And I was guilty of that. And I think being a veterinary nurse and coming from practice, it was easy for me to identify with them, because I had been in practice myself. And I remember saying to clients, oh, you don't want to feed raw. That's really dangerous and really bad. But if somebody at the time had pulled me aside and said, why is it dangerous? Why is it bad? I probably would have said, I don't know. I just had my boss say it, so I thought I'd say the same. So it's just about sort of saying to them, we understand it can be dangerous if it's done irresponsibly, but then any feeding can be dangerous if it's done irresponsibly. So it's about nurturing your customers and getting their trust, so that then they learn to come to you and ask for advice, rather than you shutting them down completely and saying, no, don't raw feed, it's terrible,
Sure.
everyone's going to die in the house. You can say to these customers, okay, how are you raw feeding? What are you raw feeding? How do you make your meals on a daily basis? What company do you go from? Where did you get your advice from? So it's about nurturing those customers. There's too much free advice out there now that customers can get their hands on. When I was in practice, when I first started, I could quite easily, as terrible as it sounds, I could dictate to customers. They come in with their 8-week-old puppy. I'd say, oh, you don't want to feed that. Feed Hill's puppy food. That's what you want to feed, and be on it forever. And then you go on to adult, and then you feed the senior. And they'd go, oh, okay, fine. You know best. Off we go. You say that to customers now in practice, and you automatically get, well, I'm not feeding that. I've read stuff about that. Or my breeder told me not to feed that. Or my friend down the park told me not to feed that. Or someone on Facebook said not to feed that. So very difficult to dictate to customers now. You have to earn their trust before you can start advising them, I think.
That is really, really cool. And you know what? It's so true. When I first started doing training and behaviour, I remember there was a sort of myth back in the day that if your dog ate loads of protein, they would become extra doggy. And like a lot of it was sort of old school pack theory that, you know, that actually
once
the
they've
leader
got the
of
taste
the pack
of blood.
Well, I mean, let's talk about that. Like, what is your perspective on that? Because all I can say from my observation is that I've never looked at a meathead walking down the road and gone, oh, that guy just basically eats loads of protein and that's why he's so aggressive. It's like, I know it's got a lot more to do with hormones, I think, aggression, than the amount of protein that you eat. You can put body mass on quite quickly, huh? But what is your perspective on that? What would you say to somebody who was like, is it not going to make my dog a little bit more doggy?
We get it all the time. I get questions all the time from customers who say, I've either seen a behaviourist or I've read online that I need to lower the protein in my dog's food because that's why he misbehaves. And you just think, oh, well, no, there's no actual scientific proof out there. As far as I'm aware, if anybody knows differently, please send it to me. But as far as I'm aware, there's no scientific proof that high protein causes hyperactivity or bad behaviour. I think a lot of the time where it stems from is these people have had their dogs on foods that are good quality maybe and have got reasonable amounts of protein in. Someone's come along and advised them to change, so they change onto something that's quite maybe maize heavy, corn heavy, maybe soy heavy. That's the first ingredient on the list. So the dog automatically becomes sluggish. It's over full. So it naturally slows down. And the owners think, oh, we've solved it. Look at him. Whereas in fact, the dog just feels so awful in itself. It can't misbehave because it just feels terrible. And I think that's my theory behind it a lot of the time. And also, train your dog. Simple answer. Again, how many times do you hear it? I'm going to get him neutered because it will calm him down. I'm going to get him spayed because it will calm him down. Well, it might do in some cases, but really and truly, just train it.
I think in terms of the neutering, the last time I checked, which was about 3 years ago, I'll be honest with you, but there was no evidence in the science literature to say that behaviour changes with spay or neuter, except to say that actually aggression can get worse. So the only measurable change by neutering your dog they found was that males will stop running off looking after females. And this is it. We're all making sort of, often a lot of guesswork in some of these areas, but all I can say, guys, is that I've trained a lot of dogs. I did 10,000 dogs in 10 years in my last practice, and 60% of their behaviour, I would say, is nutrition. And it's not to say that, actually the nutrition makes them less or more doggy. What I would say is that good nutrition gives the dog the right amount of energy to make good decisions.
Yes, exactly. It enables them to concentrate and focus much easier. Everybody's been there. You've been to, I don't have children, but I've been to friends who have got kids and they've had a party for a bunch of 5-year-olds. And what do they have at lunchtime when they arrive? Cake, Haribo, fizzy drinks. Within an hour, I want to cry because it's just carnage. But, I mean, it's a party. That's what you're supposed to do at parties. But it would be nice to have that same group of kids come back the next day and feed them fresh fish, salad and fruit and see the difference. We all know there's going to be a massive difference. So it flabbergasts me that we're quite happy to fill our dogs full of this rubbish every day and then think, why are they misbehaving, or why are they doing this, or why they're bouncing off the walls. And you just think, well, you can see it in children's nutrition. Why can you not tip that over into your dog's nutrition?
For sure. I mean, a lot of people feed a kibble, and, it's been so normal for so long for many people that actually I think the idea of raw and fresh food can just seem so unusual and scary. What would you say to somebody who is in that category that's like, look, my dog's not bad, his poos are all right, I don't understand why what I'm giving them is not ideal. What is it in that food that they should be looking for that would help them make good decisions about buying pet food, would you say?
I think we've got to look on the back of bags. That's the most important thing. We've got to understand what's in this food that we're actually feeding. And the problem is with labels, it's so confusing. I don't envy anybody out there that goes out and gets a puppy and goes, I'm just going to sit down on the internet and decide what food I'm going to feed. Just mind explosion, because there's so many options out there. Having a look at the back of the bag is one of the most important things you can do, and understanding that ingredient list is placed on the bag in the order that the ingredients are in. So if meat's first, you've got a really nice high percentage of meat in there. If you've got things like meat and animal derivatives, they're not terrible. I'm not going to sit here and say, don't feed those, they'll poison your dog. They're not the worst ingredient that you can feed by far. They're not the highest quality ingredient, but they're certainly not the worst ingredient. So it's about sort of weighing up what you want to feed your dog and the quality of food you want to feed. And I think moving on to raw, it is scary. I was in that same position for so long. I was a bit scared of sort of going over and going against veterinary experience, etc., etc. But you can do as I did, and you can dabble in it a little bit. Our transition advice is switching one meal a day for 7 days, which is so easy. If you want to feed like that forever, you can do. You can carry on feeding your kibble in the evening and your raw in the morning. You don't have to switch over. But I will say a lot of people do that, and all of a sudden they say, he's turned his nose up at his kibble now. He doesn't want it anymore. He doesn't like it. So I've had to go over to raw a lot quicker.
And would you ever combine? Would you be happy to advise people to do a little bit of kibble and a little bit of raw in the same plate?
Totally depends on the dog. I mean, there's a lot of high opinions out there, shall we say, on these sort of Facebook sites and things, saying, don't do it, you'll kill your dog, Again, I've never seen any evidence of a dog keeling over because it's had kibble and raw mixed in the same bowl. It depends on the dog. It entirely depends on the dog. Some dogs will digest raw and kibble in the same bowl absolutely fine. And
Cool.
there are millions of people that do it all over the world on a daily basis. Other dogs, not so great. If they've got some sort of sensitive digestion, it can cause a little bit of misshapen poos. It may cause vomiting if they're quite sensitive. So it really does depend on your individual dog as to whether you can mix it or not.
That is cracking. Thank you, Melanie. So on the future of dogs, we like to speculate on our what ifs. So we really love to encourage our listenership to dream big and ask those big what if questions that could change the world. So Melanie, what is your what if?
I think my what if would be, what if everybody who had a dog or was planning to get a dog just had a very basic understanding of dog nutrition. And that would be my idea. I mean, there's many things I would like a lot of dog owners to do before they go out and get a dog. But I don't think that's going to happen. And I don't think I'll ever get into Parliament and be able to pass them.
You never know. We're working on it, Melanie, believe.
But yeah, I think one of the things for me, all we hear is the horror stories of things that happen to people with dogs, dog bites. They seem to be in the news all the time. And if you're into your dogs, you just seem to hear about them all the time, and it's devastating. Mm-hmm. And I think a lot of the time, if these people were, again, educated in nutrition about how dogs are driven for food and how you can use it in so many ways. It's not just to feed your dog. You can use it to modify behaviour. You can use it to train your dog. You can use it to mentally exhaust them. There's just so many ways you can use food. But it's about using the right quality food as well. Again, you do not want to be feeding a Jack Russell Haribo 24 hours a day, because you'll probably end up with a dog that's climbing the walls and crawling across the ceiling. So it's about looking at natural ways to feed your dogs. What's affordable for you as well, really, I think is really important as well. But yeah, what if everybody had to just do a little basic nutrition course before they got their puppy or their dog? Would be a wonderful thing.
I love that answer. And where would you go? Because as you say, Melanie, the internet is full of helpful tips and confusing tips. And we've kind of reached that point as a generation where we're so swamped with opinion. Opinion is king, isn't it? Where would we go? Like, who can we trust? Oh my goodness, in the world of pet food. What should we be looking for when we're learning about dog nutrition, do you think?
I think it's a tricky one because, like you say, it is a minefield out there. There's a lot of, shall we say, opinion-based facts out there where people have just had their opinion and it's just been repeated so many times it becomes fact. So I think you need to be able to pluck those out from all the information that you see. I'm not a huge fan of social media, and I always think go to the expert. So if somebody says to you, oh, don't feed this food because it's really bad, contact the manufacturer. If that's the food that you want to feed and somebody's told you that it's bad, go to the manufacturer and say, well, I've been told that maybe your food isn't good because, can you explain why? Yeah. They should be able to come back to you with a really good factual answer. I get asked these sorts of questions all the time through customer services. Oh, I've been told X, Y, Z about your food. Is it any good for my dog? And 9 times out of 10, it's come from somebody online who, for some reason, doesn't like us or may have had some experience in the past or just doesn't like raw feeding for whatever reason. But I think it's about going to somebody who is an official expert as such. So somebody who either works for the company, but there's also people who are in specialist pet trade stores as well. We're seeing more and more of those pop up all over the UK. And they specialize, a lot of them claim to specialize in raw feeding, and they do a lot of courses as well. We run courses ourselves online for our trade customers who can participate in them. So they are able to advise fairly. And it's about, I think when you ask questions, it's again, not about dictatorship. It's about giving the customer the advice and the facts and letting them go away and make up their mind themselves. That's how I got into raw feeding. I gathered all the information. I sorted it all out in my own head and I decided to go for it. Whereas a lot of people may think, no, it's not for me, and go the other way, which is fine. But it's your choice at the end of the day, and you've got to make up your own decision for your own dog.
This is it. And, I think this generation, provenance is really important. Having a brand or any kind of, when you're feeding dogs and you're going to create a pet food, people are so much more aware now. And I love that you've got that level of transparency and openness that you're like, do you know what, give us a ring. Like, we're approachable. We're happy to talk about it. I've recently just been working with a pet shop chain called Just for Pets, and they have been taking an animal training qualification that I wrote to help upskill their staff in training and behaviour of all species of animal.
Lovely.
And they love nutrition. And their Doodles deli has like a whole bunch of dead animal. It's the best I can describe it. It's full of, I think someone once referred to it as a grotesquerie, which I really enjoyed. But I love that company. And the only reason I work with them is that they literally walk into every food that they stock. They go and see it being made.
Yeah.
And I was like, I didn't even know you could do that. Like, that's really cool that honest, good companies who are working with decent ingredients and genuinely care about your pet's health are going to be open door procedure with you and show you, their protein source, and was it extruded if it was kibble or fresh truded, and, where did that particular meat source come from? I just think that level of transparency is 100% crucial in this generation when it comes to pet food. So tell us a little bit more, Melanie, about the problems that people come to you with when they are thinking about sort of crossing over into the raw food world. What are your biggest buts that you come up against when people are phoning you and being like, but I don't, but.
Yeah. It's so we call them raw feeding barriers, is what we refer to them as, and there's sort of several really common ones that we come across. So I think the most important thing is convenience. That's something that people think, it's just going to take too much time. I've got 3 kids that I need to look after. I need to cook a dinner every night. I don't have time to be faffing around with the dog's food. I'd rather just chuck some kibble in a bowl and stick it in front of the dog and he eats it, and that's all I'm worried about. I think storage is another issue as well, because they think they're just going to have an absolute freezer full of dead animal parts and legs and limbs falling out the drawers every time they open them.
Yes.
Cost is a big thing as well, because I think it's perceived as being really expensive and out of people's reach. But actually, when you drill down into it, if you're already feeding quite a high quality kibble, which most people are when they're sort of sat on the fence thinking about coming over to raw because they've looked into nutrition and they're a bit more sort of savvy about it. If they're feeding a good quality kibble, it's not really a huge amount of difference to switch over. And again, they're not always stuck on the same thing. That's another barrier that we get quite a lot. I'd love to switch over to raw, but I compete with my dogs, or I go away in my camper van quite a lot, so I don't really have any room for storage. Well, we've got so many alternatives that you can use. So many different options where you don't have to worry about taking frozen food with you, or you can order it whilst you're on holiday in the UK and have it delivered to you. Our drivers have delivered to campsites and tents and hotels and God knows what else. So there are always ways around it. And again, you don't always have to feed the frozen food. You can take something alternative with you if it's easier.
I actually noticed in your bio, Mel, when it was sent over, that you are a VW camper van girl and you like to go on camper van holidays.
We do.
And what you don't know about me is that I recently had a motorhome, and so I 100% vibe with you in that region. And I was literally confronted with this problem. So my dog Falkor is a Cocker Spaniel, and when I wasn't on tour and I was living at home, we would have frozen food. And he'd have delicious nuggets in the freezer, and that's what he would feed. This really, really easy. I don't have to touch it. I'll pour it out into a bowl. It defrosts. I squish it into a complicated thing that he can take a little bit longer to eat, and he enjoys that. And then I was in this motorhome and I was like, what are we going to do now, bro? Because like there's no freezer in a motorhome.
With a freezer, it's this big.
When you're driving around, it's on, and then when you stop for a minute, it switches off. So like, how do we do this? And then I was like, but there's so many fresh versions. So we got some tins for a little while, and then I did the maths and was like, hold fire now. These tins are heavy in the van, so that's going to cost me more petrol. And then you guys came out with a pouch, and I was like, this is just joy. It is super, like, it's not heavy to cart around. And I could get his Kong. This is my favourite thing about these pouches, right? It is perfect. You wedge it into the end and
squeeze like a tube of toothpaste. Yes.
I could not. It was just so easy. So yeah, personal experience. It's not a difficult thing to maneuver around. And I trust you guys with it because you've given him solid poos and really good behaviour for so long. The fresh food is good too. Mel, would you come back and do a part 2 with us?
I'd love to. I could talk for hours. So yeah, you're more than welcome.
Right. I think we've come at this from 2 very similar angles, actually, professionally, for a little while now. So I wonder maybe in part 2 whether you can tell us a little bit more about talking to vets, because I think that can be a problem for some people, can't it? Is that
Definitely.
If I want to keep my vet on side, but also move into a different level of food, whether we could talk a bit about that. And perhaps, Mel, you could give us some tips on picking the right food for your dog, and the kinds of stuff we can do with treat training. How do you treat train a raw fed dog? Like, that's a really interesting question. So if you're happy to, we would love to have you back.
Brilliant.
Thank you so much, Mel. It has been an absolute pleasure talking all things raw and natural pet food with you. And that is all we have time for in this episode of The Future of Dog Food Part 1. We will see you next week.